Hello everyone. Today we will be talking about Maya 2017. This is an introduction video, and the topics we will try and cover include menus, shelves, navigation, object creation, main menu, channel box and attribute editor, object manipulation, freezing transformations, deleting history, duplicate and duplicate special options. So the first thing we want to do is, of course, to open Maya. By default, this is what you should see on your screen. And we will start looking, first of all, at the menus at the very top. So you will see that some of them are pretty usual and familiar to you. So this is our file menu where you can save your work. It's a really good idea to save as often as you can, but we will be talking about this a little bit more in the future videos. So one important thing to notice here is that at the moment, all the menu items belong to this modeling menu. So we can switch between different types of menu just over here. The three menus we will be working with consistently throughout this course are modeling, rigging, and animation. And you will see that as soon as we switch to a different menu, you will be getting a different looking list of menus at the top as well. So if we go back to modeling, those will be specific, or at least most of them will be specific to when we're modeling something. You can find a lot of different useful commands under those tabs. There is no real logic behind how the things are organized, so sometimes you will have to hunt for a command or just Google it to see in which particular tab you can find it. But those are the ones that you will be using the most. So it's mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools, and mesh display. We won't really be working with curves and surfaces that much. We will be using UV editor. You can also see that your menu probably looks a little bit different. So I have this custom AC utilities option here, which we will be learning how to install later on. So this will be very useful for you when you start working on your skeletons for your characters, so that you can manipulate them on the screen, so that you can have different animations performed by your character. You will also notice that some of the items in Maya are highlighted in green. It means that those are new options, and by default they will be highlighted. You can turn this off every time you open up Maya. You will get a prompt saying or asking you if you want to keep this on or off. I usually keep this on. It doesn't really matter too much. So another couple of things here, you can see that you can save your file or open your file or create a new file just from those little menus over here. I don't really use them that much. Also notice how every time I hover over something, at the bottom of the screen you will get a description of what it actually does. So let's try this out. It says create a new scene at the bottom of the screen, which is quite useful. So sometimes if you don't understand what an icon means, you can always look at the bottom of the screen. Those are the component menus. You don't really have to worry about them much at the moment. They will be quite helpful once you start working on the skeletons again for your characters. Those over here are the so-called constraints or snapping options. So sometimes when you have an object in the scene, you want to be able to snap it to something else. So you can snap it to the grid, or you can snap it to other polygonal surfaces or even curves. So we will probably be looking at that a little bit more later on, but this is just so that you know what those do. Over here it says no live surfaces at the moment, meaning that sometimes you can also snap to an object. You can make an object in your scene live, and the rest of the object will be able to be snapped to that. So this is quite cool. You don't really use that much, so you don't have to worry about that for now as well. Those are our inputs and outputs. We can leave them as they are for now as well. Construction history on off, by default it should be always on, otherwise you might run into some very weird problems. History is a topic in itself, which we will be talking a little bit about today as well. And those are the rendering icons over here. So whenever you want to showcase your model, you can render it inside this program, and you will get a proper image of your model. So we will be looking at those later on in the course. So another thing I want to talk to you about are those shelves at the bottom of the screen. So shelves usually duplicate the commands that can be found over here at the top of the screen. So sometimes instead of having to switch to your rigging menu over here, you can just go into your rigging and you already have a couple of commands available to you. I usually use this polygons shelf, and I consider it my user shelf as well, so you can see that you probably don't have all those icons on your shelf. I have been adding them to mine so that I have quick access to them. You can also add scripts, like this one, for example, is a mel script. You can create your own shelves, or you can use user shelves. So over here, you will see that there is something that says new shelf. I don't really want to be creating another one, but you can play around with those. You can add new shelves and delete new shelves, and you can add icons to those after that. Cool, so let's talk about the navigation. Navigating around the screen is quite easy in Maya, but it might take you a little while to get used to it. So to rotate like this, and you can see that there is a little icon on the screen, you need to press left Alt and hold left mouse button, and you should be able to rotate around the screen. So for panning, it's the same left Alt plus middle mouse button. So press and hold and move your mouse around to get this panning. And left and right click, Alt and right click is our zooming in and zooming out. So this is how you can rotate around the scene. It's quite easy, just do it a couple of times and you will get used to it. So let's see about how we can create our first object. So the first thing, let's talk about different types of creation. If we go under our create menu over here and go to our polygons primitives, if we click on this interactive creation and go back and try and create a cube, you will see that it says drag the base on the grid. So it actually lets us decide the size of an object just by dragging those rectangles around. I never use this method of creating things because immediately it creates translate, rotate, and other values for me, which we will be talking about in a second. So instead of using this interactive creation tool, I usually turn it off. So we'll go under create, polygon primitives, and we will uncheck this interactive creation. And now we can go back and create a cube from here. Also, alternatively, instead of going into the menu, I will press delete on my keyboard to get rid of the cube. You can also create it from shelf, so there is a couple of primitives available to you on this polygons shelf, and I usually use it all the time. So most of the times when you start a new model, you will be starting from a primitive. Probably the first important thing to know how to do is how to undo something. So in Maya by default it's Z. So if I create something and I press Z, you will see that it immediately gets rid of whatever we just created on the screen. But let's create another cube again. So we created one, and let's quickly talk about the icons over here, or actually the menus over here. We will not really be using lots of them. There is just a couple I want to mention to you. So if by any chance at some point you will start noticing that your camera is behaving weirdly, you can always go into your view and click on default view, so that should reset your camera. So you can see how Maya automatically focuses on whatever was selected last, and for me it was this cube. Also, if by any chance you got a little bit too far away from an object, and it might be a little bit too painful for you to scroll around, you can select the object by just drag selecting it or just clicking on it and press F on your keyboard, and that will zoom in on this object you selected. So again, if you're too far away, you can either drag select the object, or you can click on it and press F on your keyboard to zoom in. Cool, so another thing here for the shading, we usually just use the standard smooth shade all. Sometimes you need to go into your wireframe mode. So as you can see, it says wireframe and 4. So let's talk about different short keys for that. So if we press 4 with the object selected, you will see that okay, this is our cube and we don't see the shading of the object anymore, it's just the wireframe. If we wanted to bring back the shading, we would have to press 5, and you will see that it says shaded display is on now. 6 will give you a textured preview of your model. At the moment, we don't really have any textures assigned to this object. It's just, let's say, a standard shader or a standard material assigned to it, so you won't see any difference between number 5 and number 6. And the next important short key is 7. So you will see immediately that your cube went black. 7 is use all lights in the scene. So at the moment we haven't created any lights in the scene, and that's why as soon as we pressed 7, our cube just became black because there is no light to reflect. So if you accidentally press it, don't get scared, just press either 5 or 6 to get back to your shaded mode. So under lighting here, you have different options for lighting as well. You usually use default lighting for when you're just modeling, and once you have everything set up and you wanted to take a beautiful render and just see where your shadows are and things like that, you can use your all lights or 7, as we've just discussed. The next item here is show. So you can see that at the moment we're showing absolutely everything, although our scene is really empty. But if we had any of those objects, we would be able to see them in the scene. Sometimes it gets a little bit too hard to see what's happening in the scene, and we want to hide certain elements. So we can do it from this menu. And by hiding, I don't mean deleting them, so at any given point you can bring them back just by checking those items back on. So see what happens if we uncheck polygons. This is a polygonal cube on your screen, so if we uncheck this, it will disappear. But we can always go back to show and press polygons, and it's back on. So render, by default, it's using viewport 2.0, which is, it has become standard for Maya. It used to be the default viewport back in the days, but it seems to be working fine. It used to be a little bit laggy, so you can just stick with it for now. And panels, you won't really be using them much, so you can see that at the moment for the perspective camera, which we are in at the moment, as you can see it says so at the bottom of the screen. If we had more cameras we created ourselves, we would be able to see them here. You can also create them from here as well. Sometimes the option look through selected can be quite interesting when you work with lights, but we will talk about it a little bit later on. And a couple of more things over here, which we will not be talking in detail at the moment, but those can be quite cool. So if you forget which numbers on your keyboard represent what, you can always just use them from here. So this is your wireframe mode, this is your shaded mode, this is your material, this is a wireframe unshaded, which can be quite cool and quite useful. So this is the proper textured mode, and this is turn on the lights. So I'm just gonna uncheck everything. Also really useful is this little guy here, which is called isolate select. Sometimes you can assign it to a short key, so you don't have to click on it. I usually have it assigned to I. So let's create another object. So as you can see, Maya by default creates all of the objects in the middle of this grid. So this is considered our zero coordinates. So we have the sphere here, and by default it sort of is overlaying the other object. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky for us to be able to see things clearly. So let's move it out and talk about our transform gizmos. So there's a couple of Q combinations you have to remember. So Q is our select. So it's Q for selection. You usually are in this mode by default, as you can see over here. This is your selection mode. W is your move gizmo. So at the moment nothing is selected, so you can't see it. But as soon as I select the sphere, you will see those little arrows that appeared on the object. And if I drag the red arrow, it means that I will be moving this object along the x-axis into the positive direction. So where the arrow is pointing is the positive direction on x, and the other direction will be negative. And the same with the rest of the axis. So I can grab the arrow and move it out. You don't have to constrain yourself to those dimensions. You can also use those little squares over here. So this is constraining on two axes, which will be our x and y. That little green fellow over there is our x and z, and this one is our y and z. If you wanted to move it freely without constraining to any of the axes, you can just click in the middle, and now you're just moving it anywhere. I usually don't move it like that because when you're modeling you need precision. I just want to move this sphere out so I can click on the cube and show you what our isolate select does. So if we click on it, you will see that the sphere disappeared. It wasn't deleted or anything like that. At the moment we're just viewing this cube in isolation from everything else. So if we had multiple objects in our scene, and for some reason it was too hard for us to focus on one particular object, we can always go into isolate select mode. And once you're done working with this object and you want to bring everything back, you will just have to uncheck this isolate select, and everything will be back to normal. So as you can see, you've already learned a couple of different ways of being able to work with specific objects. Again, it's show, for example, but if we use our polygons here, it will get rid of both of the objects. Let's really quickly create a curve. So curves are really useful when we do rigging. There is a special subdivision, I guess, of a modeling called NURBS modeling, which we will not be covering in this class, but it's just something for you to remember that curves belong to NURBS as well. So if we click on this curve and just leave it where it is and go back to our show menu and uncheck the polygons, you will see that this curve stays because it's a different type of object. But we can also get rid of the curve itself. So we will just have to uncheck this NURBS curves, and you will see that it has disappeared, although it is still there. So that's it for the overview of those icons. You won't really be needing anything else from here, at least for now. So let's keep talking about different types of manipulation we can do with our objects. So we've discussed how to move objects around. I also want to show you how to rotate objects. So to be able to rotate an object, you have to click on E on your keyboard, E, or you can click on this icon over here. And it's the same sort of deal as with the move gizmo. So you have those differently colored axes. At the moment I can see my y-axis is green, z-axis is always blue, and at the moment x-axis is selected, x-axis is red, so if I select my blue one, you will see that whatever becomes deselected is red, so this is our x, and when you select something it goes yellow. At the moment my gizmo is a little bit too small, so I can't really although I can still manipulate the object, it would be cool if it was a little bit bigger than the object itself. So if you're unhappy with the size of your gizmo, you can press plus and minus on your numpad, and you will see how the gizmo is growing. So if your gizmo is too huge and you can't see it, or it's too tiny and it's really hard to select, you can always manipulate it with your numpad plus and minus. So now it's the same deal as with the previous gizmo. If I can rotate it on different axes, I can also rotate it in alignment with my view. So that's this blue circle around all of the other axes. And I can always just click on the object and drag it around, and it will be not constrained to any of the axes, so it's sort of free rotation for it. The next tool we will look at will be scale. So scale is R on keyboard, and you will see those tiny little cubes. It's absolutely the same deal as with the rest of the gizmos. So the middle one will scale it uniformly. The red one will scale it on X, this one on Z, and this one on Y. And you can also scale it just on 2 axes as well. So try this out. Also, I bet by now you've noticed that every time we do something with the object, something happens on the screen here on the right side. So this is our channel box, and channel box shows the transformation values of the object. So at the moment you can see that we have some translate values, because if you remember, we moved the sphere around. And you're probably wondering, well, what does this 1 mean? It means that we repositioned the object in our world, which is our scene, and we repositioned it by 1. Also, 1 means 1 grid square over here. So if I were to take this little cube, and you can see that at the moment this gizmo is sitting right in the middle, and I'm just going to start dragging around and roughly put it where I think the grid line is. You will see that we are getting really close to -1. And as I mentioned before, because we're moving into the opposite direction from where the arrow is pointing, it means that we're going into the negative. So channel box is really useful. If you wanted to be quite specific and precise with the amount of rotation you're giving to the object, for example, you can always come in here and start inputting values here, and you will see that immediately and things will change for you on the screen as well. You can also change the values of your translation. And another cool trick is that you can click on any of those and middle mouse drag on the screen and start moving it like this. So if you click on this translate Y, for example, and now I'm just middle mouse dragging on the screen and I'm holding my middle mouse, it gets constrained to the Y-axis and the values are changing. You can also zero everything out from here. Just be careful with your scale, because if you zero it out, you will see that your cube has disappeared. So put it back to 1. This is the default amount of scale you get when you create an object. Because we haven't really done anything to the sphere here, you will see that it's still 1 by 1 by 1 as well. Cool, so what else is channel box useful for? It's actually a really important thing to keep looking at it. Especially when you start rigging, you will notice that you are making a lot of mistakes just because you're not cautious enough about the way you're using your channel box. So let's say this is the position where I want my sphere to be at all times. So I want this to be its default position and not this 0 coordinates. So how could we achieve that? Because at the moment, you can see that we have specific values for this sphere over here, meaning that if we moved it around, it would be really hard for us to bring it back to where it was before. And you don't really want to be undoing the work every time you do something else, and then you have to undo just to be able to put the sphere where it was before, but you don't really want to be writing those values down. So one thing to make this particular point in space, the 0 coordinate of the sphere, is something that is called freezing transformations. So if I go back to my polygons shelf, I will show you where it's sitting for me. So I have a special icon for it that I have created before. You don't have it on your shelf just yet, but we will learn how to create one, and we will see what happens when we use it. So if we go under our modify and we click on freeze transformations, also just a note, you can see there's a little square to the right of freeze transformations. It means that there are options for this command that we can change. So if I click on this, it will bring up a new window for us. And all it does is saying us that if we click on it, it will freeze, translate, rotate, scale values, and joint orient values for the object which we have selected, which is the default. If you're not sure whether you have the default values, you can always go under Edit and click Reset Settings. So as you can see, joint orient was not one of those settings that should be turned on by default. And it doesn't really matter at the moment because we're not working with joints. So this is what you should be able to see on your screen. So we could hit apply from here or hit freeze transform, doesn't matter too much. One of them will leave the window open, and the other one will just close it. We can just close this window for now. Let's go back to modify and freeze transformations and click on it. So you will see that something happened on the screen, but you might have not noticed that. What it did, it got rid of all the values in our channel box for the translate, meaning that this point in space is our default position of the object now. So if we moved it to some other place, and after that we wanted to move it back where it was before, we can just zero out the values, and this is where it's living now. So it's not like for this cube where its default position is in the middle of this grid. It's over here. So this is extremely useful, and whenever you're done working on an object and you're happy with its position, you should always freeze transformations. So how do we put this icon onto the shelf so we don't have to go each time to our modify and click freeze transforms from here? You can add items on your shelf by going Control Shift and clicking on them. So if I go modify, Control Shift, and click on freeze transformations, you will see that on my shelf it immediately created an icon for my freeze transformation. So now if I wanted to move this sphere over here and say that this is my default position for the sphere now, I can just click on this freeze transformations icon, and it will do exactly the same as what it did before when we went into the menu, special menu for that. Also, if you create way too many of those icons, for some reason you have duplicates like I do at the moment, you can always just right click on it and go delete. So this is really simple. One thing that you should remember is to save your shelves. So if you're creating a lot of icons, don't forget to click Save All Shelves, and it will save your custom icons. You can put this back. Also, if I get rid of those guys, let's take a look how we can utilize our snapping. Because we talked a little bit about it, but I want to show you really quickly how easy it is to use, for example, snap to grid. So we could turn it on from here. If you can see at the bottom of the screen, it says snap to grids. Or we can press and hold X on our keyboard. And now you will see that this tiny little gizmo changed. So I will be just dragging the sphere around like this, and I will put it in the middle of our grid. So again, you will see those thick lines. This is where the middle of the grid is. And you will see that we're accumulating new values. So what if I wanted this position to be my default position for the sphere? Again, all we have to do is to freeze our transformations. And it's as good as new. It's pretty much the same as how it was before when we just created it. Another thing in the channel box, you will see that there is something called inputs. So whenever you're manipulating your object, and especially when we start adding new subdivisions or adding new pieces of geometry to this sphere, everything that we do to the model will be recorded in the inputs in our channel box. So let's take a look. I will be using something called Insert Edge. I have it on my shelf over here. I think you can find it under Mesh Tools and go under Insert Edge Loop. So you don't have to worry about not really understanding how to use it for now. Just click on it. It will tell you click and drag on edges. So edges are those lines on the object. And I can start. I click, drag, and I'm not releasing just yet. So I can start adding more divisions to our sphere. Don't really need them, but just to show you what happens with the object. Once you're happy with using the tool, to get out of it, press Q on your keyboard, or just click anywhere on the screen. And the next thing to do, which we haven't really talked about, is to go back to our object mode. So bear with me, we will be talking about that in later videos, but for now, right click and hold on your model and click on this object mode so that we can get out of the mode we were in before, which was our edges mode. And don't worry about that for now. So all I wanted to show you is how we have accumulated a lot of inputs just by using that one tool. And imagine if you are working on a complicated model. At some point, this list will be really, really long. So this is something that is called history. Working on the model, we are accumulating an object's history. And whenever Maya starts lagging or behaving a little bit funny, it means that there is a lot of history on your objects. It just can't keep remembering all those operations, because what actually happens is that we can go into any of those and we can start changing things. So I can say that I'm adding 10 more edges instead of just one. And I can do the same with another poly split ring. So that was our insert edge loop tool. So go and change this to multi and add another 20. So we're starting to get really crazy with this, right? And Maya has to remember all of those, which is quite hard. So what we can do once we're happy with everything, we can delete the history so that the object becomes, it will hold all the information, everything that you've done to the object will be still there, but it will get rid of all of those inputs, and you won't be able to use them anymore. So you won't be able to change it like I just did, switching things around. So to be able to do that, we have to delete history. I have this icon over here on my shelf, which I will not be using just now. I will show you where to find it. So you will have to go under Edit, Delete by Type, and History. So they have a short key, Alt-Shift-D, which I don't really use. It's so much easier for me to just have it sitting on my shelf instead. So we'll do the same thing as we did with the transformations, or freeze transformations before. Press Ctrl-Shift, click History, left click, and the history icon will get added to your shelf. So now watch what happens when we select our sphere again by clicking on it and click on this icon. You will see that there are no more inputs. So this is a clean model now. It has no values in the channel box. It has no inputs, so we got rid of all of those. And we can also rename this object. Say, let's call it sphere finished. So renaming is as simple as clicking here and renaming it to whatever you want it to be. It is very important to remember to rename your object, especially when you start working on more complicated things, and you will start working with the outliner, which you probably don't see on your screen at the moment, but we will be looking at it a little bit later. For me, it's just sitting over here. And if you wanted to take a look at it as a proper window, we can always go to Windows, click on the outliner, and this little outliner will contain all the objects that you have in your scene over here. So you can see that our sphere is here. So if I lost it on the screen over here somehow, maybe I had a lot of objects and I didn't know which one. So imagine if we had lots of spheres everywhere, just absolutely everywhere, lots of spheres. And I don't know which one was my original sphere, the one that I added all those subdivisions to. It's hard to see from here. Of course, I could just start clicking them one by one to figure out the name, but I can just look in my outliner, and I see that this is my original sphere finished, and I can select it from here by just clicking on it. And that's it. That's why outline is really important, and I just have setting it here to the left of my screen. So you can do the same if you just click on this tiny little icon at the bottom to get a new way your screen is looking. So we talked about this. Really quickly, I wanted to talk to you about another important window on the right, which is our attribute editor. So attribute editor holds all of the information about the object, and normally you don't really have to come here too often. Sometimes when you're working with some of the objects, you might have to change a couple of things. Like for example, if you wanted to render a transparent object, you would have to go into your attribute editor and into the shape node and look for the air node tab. And from here you would have to get rid of this opaque so that you can render it as a transparent object. This is also where you can see what kind of shaders are assigned to your object. So shaders are pretty much our textures. As you can see, all of those objects in here, they have this Lambert 1 assigned to them. All of those. So you can scroll a little bit to the right because we haven't deleted history on those guys. They have a little bit more tabs because we can still change a couple of different things about those spheres. But all of them will have this Lambert 1 assigned. So by default, this is the material Maya uses for everything that you create. If we created something like a plane over here, it's a little bit hard to see. So if you remember, R is our scale. Just scale it out. You will see that it also has this Lambert 1 as its material. So it's quite important to remember. So those will be your friends, your attribute editor, and your channel box, especially your channel box. Okay, so now let's talk about how, let's first of all talk about the different views. So as you noticed, and as I've mentioned before, we are sitting in the perspective view at the moment. So meaning that we can move around freely, we can look from different angles, different directions. But what happens if we want to be really specific? You probably know that modelers use something that is called model sheets. So they have a front view of an object, they have a side view of an object, and they want to be really specific about how they model things. So to be able to use special views in Maya, there's a couple of ways of doing this. An easy way is to click here, and you will get your view. So you can see the names of the views at the bottom. So this is our top view, front view, side view, and our perspective. And if we wanted to maximize on any of them, we can hover over the view and press spacebar. So it makes it go big. And if we press spacebar again, it will go back to our view. I usually don't use this method, so it can be quite useful. But for me, because I work on a laptop, I don't really want to have tiny windows. I like working with my big window. So if I go back to my perspective view, if I press spacebar, just press and not really doing anything else, pressing spacebar and holding, I'm getting this menu. So all of the menus you have at the top, you are able to find from here. But what I use it for is to switch between different views. So if we press spacebar and click on Maya, and if you click and hold, you will see that you're getting different views you can go into. So for example, you can click on right view, and it will bring your right view. Do the same thing again, press spacebar, left click on Maya in the middle, left click and hold, and then just drag this little wire to whichever view you want to go to. So for example, front view. It might take some time to get used to this, but it's really simple. Sometimes when you become more efficient and proficient in Maya, you will notice that by accident you might be creating a lot of new cameras, so just be careful about it, because right view and perspective view are so close to this new camera. And you can go back to your perspective view. You will notice that when you're in the front view, if you try to rotate around, you will see that you can't, because it's an orthographic view. And if you try, Maya will tell you that orthographic views cannot be tumbled, which is fair enough. So in here we can pan and we can zoom in and zoom out. So again, our panning is Alt and middle mouse drag, and zoom in and zoom out is Alt and right mouse click. let's go to our perspective view. So the next thing I want to show you before we finish this video is how to duplicate objects, because this will be your next assignment. It's going to be a tiny modeling exercise for you. So, well, first of all, let's see how to duplicate an object. At the moment I have this cube selected. If I press Ctrl D, it will create a new one, and I know this because I'm looking in my outliner. If you drag it out now, you will see that indeed there are two of them. And I can keep doing this, so I can click on this cube now. And you see I'm also having some values here. So Ctrl D again, drag it out. Another cube. So what I just did there, I was showing you, because we didn't freeze transformations on this object, it means that even though this is a duplicate, we can still put it back to the 0 coordinates. So it still remembers sort of where its original parent came from. So we can get rid of those. And now Ctrl D is our duplicate command. There is another one which can be quite useful, and it might be interesting for you to use for the other exercise. And this is duplicate with transformations. So let's say that I wanted to always create a cube and have the same distance between them. So if I press Ctrl D and drag it out a little bit, and I'm just looking into my channel block, so maybe it's 1.5 roughly. If I wanted to repeat it a couple of times, I can just press Shift D, and you will see that it will create an infinite amount of cubes for us, and they will all have the same difference or distance between them, which is really useful. You can do the same thing just by noting. So just by noting how much we're adding to our translate. But this is a little bit trickier, just because you don't really want to be doing maths all the time. So what we can do is go into our translate x and change it to 1.5, freeze transforms, so that it becomes 0 out. Press Ctrl D, translate x 1.5, and keep going on like that. So that can be quite useful. Or alternatively, could go to my front view, just do something a little bit more interesting. So Ctrl D, gonna put this roughly like this. And I know I'm only manipulating this object on X and Y at the moment, which is good. And if I press Shift D again, you will see how we're getting this really cool effect. So that's awesome. And so this will be almost everything. But I wanted to show you another cool thing. So at the moment we were using our Shift D as duplicate with transforms, but there's another cool way of using this. So for this we will have to manipulate the pivot point of the object just a little bit. This is not hard at all. So from my top view, I'm looking at this cube, and I sort of want to duplicate it around the 0 coordinates, so that we have 3 more cubes, and they are positioned the same distance from the 0 coordinates, so they sort of like make this kind of diamond shape. So how can we do this? There is a couple of different ways, but we will take a look at how we can manipulate the pivot point of the object. So with my X, because I want to snap to the grid, with my X pressed, I will move this cube a little bit. It doesn't matter how far, so you can move it further away or closer, doesn't matter at all. So what I want to do now is to change where the middle of the gizmo is sitting. So at the moment all the manipulations are happening to the object, and they're happening in the way where this is kind of the middle of all the transformations happening to it. But what if I wanted this pivot point, this middle point of the object, not to be in the middle of the object, but to be sitting somewhere over here? What kind of cool effects could we be getting out of this, right? So if you press D on your keyboard, you will see that the gizmo has changed a little bit. It means that we are manipulating the pivot point of the object. This is what it's called in Maya. It's called pivot point. So now I can use the same snap to grid option to snap to the middle of my grid here. So I'll be pressing and holding X on the keyboard, and I will be using my blue arrow to move it around. And I will just put it here in the middle of those thick grid lines. And I will press D again to get out of that pivot changing mode. So now you see that as soon as we click on the object and we go into our move mode by pressing W, or if we press E or R, you see that the pivot point of our gizmo is sitting here in the 0 coordinates of the grid. So just right in the middle of the grid. Meaning that if we wanted to rotate the object, it would be rotating around this pivot point. So that's quite cool. It's especially cool for working with rotation gizmo. Usually you wouldn't really need it for your, moving. It doesn't really give you anything. Sometimes it might be useful for scaling if you wanted to get some really cool effects. But we will just use it for our rotation. So let's take a look at our duplicate special options. So for that you will have to go under Edit, Duplicate Special and Options. And there's a lot of things you don't really have to worry about, so just use the settings I have here for now. For the geometry type, it will be Copy. If we set it to Instance, it means that all the transformations we will be applying to the original model will be applied to kind of the children, the instances. So group under Parent, it's fine, or we can group it under the world or the scene itself. Just reset it. So the default values should be fine. Translate. So we could translate the object. We could duplicate it and translate it at the same time if we wanted to. But in this particular case, we will not really be using translation as much. And also you're probably wondering why we have 3 different columns here. So they represent X, Y, and Z values. So the same as what we have in the channel box, where we have them separated, like translate X, translate Y, translate Z. In other places in Maya where you see those 3 boxes, you can immediately assume that this is X, this is Y, and this is Z. So we will be rotating it on which axis? If you look at it and you see that, okay, our blue axis is not selected, and it's probably not the one we want. Our x-axis over here, if we started rotating it, this cube will be just going up and down, kind of. So it means the only axis left is our y-axis, and it's currently selected. So we know that we will be rotating on y, and y is our second column over here. So rotation works with degrees. So we can assume that the full circle will be 360. So every time we duplicate this object, we want it to be rotated 90 degrees. I hope my math is fine. So if we click on this, we don't need to scale the object. So we could play around with this, or you could see what happens if you just change one of the values a little bit. And for the number of copies, Maya is asking us how many of those new cubes we want to create. So for me it will be 3 more. And we don't really have to worry about anything else. We don't really want to be using the same connections or the same inputs for the object, so we'll just use this as it is. And hit apply and see what happens. So it positioned new cubes, it created new cubes for us first of all, and it positioned them perfectly. And it also left all of those values for us as well. So you can see, although we didn't put anything into the translate, we're still getting some translate values, because of course in our original cube we had this translate Z. In our duplicate on this one, of course it will be translate X. And we're also getting some rotation values as well. So this is really cool and useful, and you can play around with it a little bit more, because for your homework you will be creating a tower with set of steps going all the way around it to the top, and you already know how to do most of it. So you will just need to work with the duplicate special options a little bit, and you will have to figure out how to change the Y of the objects as well. So you can either figure it out manually, or you can use your duplicate special options for that as well. So that's it for now. I know it's a lot of information, but that's the first introductory videos. It's gonna be easier from now on because you already have learned quite a bit. And thank you so much for watching. Until the next video.